Hey Backseaters, welcome to Don't Make Me Come Back There. My name is Stephen English and I'm the producer of the aforementioned podcast. I'm in the front seat today because Dustin Nickerson is in Los Angeles, California right now because he just taped his very first late night stand-up set for the Late Late Show with James Corden. We could not be more proud. And speaking of firsts, you know he has that first book, How to Be Married to Melissa, out now wherever books are sold. Now, personally, I'm not a reader, okay? Don't like reading. I've never read for pleasure. I've never read in a church setting. I read a billboard on accident last week and I got so upset. It ruined my day. Absolutely ruined my day. I canceled my dinner plans. That's how bad of a mood I was in. But the good news is there's an audiobook version of How to Be Married to Melissa, and it is also out now wherever audiobooks are sold. And as a special treat, this week's episode is the first chapter of that audiobook. So sit back and relax and get ready for the smooth, dulcet tones of Dustin Nickerson reading his book to you. And check out our Patreon. Check out Dustin's YouTube page. Check out his Instagram. Check out his TikTok. Check out his Flip Flap. That's a new app you guys don't even know about. It's only in Chechnya. But also check out DustinNickerson.com for his tour dates, for his upcoming seasonal headliner tour. He's going to be all over the place. He's going to be in Chicago at some point. I don't know. I don't have the dates in front of me. He's going to be in Appleton, Wisconsin, I think. San Diego. He's going to be here. He's going to be there. He's going to be everywhere. So there's so many ways for you to interact with the Dustin Nickerson comedy brand. I'm so jealous of you. You guys sit back, relax, enjoy this episode, and we'll see you next week.
Chapter 1. If you like Fight Club, you'll love marriage. A couple of years ago, a Huffington Post lifestyle reporter asked readers to share the details of the fight that ended their marriage. An unfortunate man named Kyle said his 7-year marriage fizzled over a fight about lunch. A woman named Sherry recounted her 18-year marriage ending over a fight about her cell phone usage. And Matt's marriage crashed and burned when he called his children from a previous marriage, quote, my girls. I think as an unmarried person, you might hear those stories and say, oh my, I can't believe a marriage ended over something so small and petty. But as a married person, we hear those stories and go, yeah, I can see that. That's because we know the arguments themselves are never the issue. They're always a symptom of the deeper problem. In the 20 years that we've been together, Melissa and I have survived an estimated 82,396 spats. If current trends persist, that number should increase by at least 1,000 by the time of this book's publication. Yes, that's correct. Writing a marriage book has increased the number of marital fights in my home. While every fight in our home is different, they're always about something very, very important. And I know for a fact it's not just us. To this day, I've never met a couple who didn't have at least one board game fight. I've also never met a couple whose wounds from their board game fights ever fully healed. Yes, I've heard horror stories of games of Settlers of Catan that led to husbands settling on the couch, games of Monopoly that left wives morally bankrupt, and games of life that almost ended in actual life. Melissa and I's board game brawl was during a game of Scattergories in 2004, and it's been a point of tension for almost 18 years. I promise you, she is seething right now, realizing that this is being published without her getting to tell her side of the story. If you're not familiar with this game, it's simple. Someone says a category, and you list something in that category that starts with the assigned letter. So if the category is colors and the letter is B, you write down blue, and the judge gives you a point. Simple, fun, anyone can win. The perfect setting for a verbal brawl that will be remembered for decades. So here we are, playing a wholesome game of Scattergories with some friends and family. We are in the first home we lived in together, drinking hot chocolate, and laughs are abounding. It's the scene of a modern-day Rockwell. The only problem is that the game is winding down to its last round. Melissa and I are tied for first place. Whoever gets the next point wins the game. The category, things in the ocean. The letter, W. The timer starts. Melissa immediately buckles under the pressure and writes whale. This is, of course, accurate, but if any other player has the same answer, you don't get the point. There's no way someone else isn't going to write whale. A complete choke from Melissa. I dig deep. I pass over my initial thought of whale and reach to the depths of the ocean itself as the buzzer sounds. I write water. Because what, if not water, is in the ocean? But I know I will need to do some convincing. This will not be accepted without heated debate. Melissa reads whale and it gets canceled out immediately. There's no way that basic answer was making it through. She knows she blew it and that her only hope is to tear me down. She's in a desperate situation. It's honestly a little sad and pathetic. But she's no quitter, and I admire her tenacity. I say, water. The group is instantly divided. I knew it was going to come down to a vote. I make my case. Very articulately, I appeal to the judges, the other players, that the ocean is not water. Nay, it has water. It is full of many things. The ocean is no more water than it is seaweed and fish. Ocean is simply the collective term for all the things that make up that which is the sea. I remind them that sky is not air. It has air. The judges are persuaded. Water is in the ocean. Melissa is furious. She rolls her eyes so far to the back of her head that they touch her shoulder blades. I tell her, there was a vote. If you're upset, you're not upset with me. You're upset with democracy. Melissa's anger is tearing down society. That's what I'm getting at. Quick note to Mel. I know this isn't how you remember the story, but A, it's how I remember it, and B, it's much funnier this way. They paid us a decent amount of money to write this book, so let me punch it up a bit. Sometimes you have a fight so big it doesn't end the game, it ends the party. That's what this fight was. A game of scattergories caused our friends to scatter from our home.
Right. So Dustin paints a lovely picture here, but you should know that earlier in the game, he'd convinced our friends to vote down my A word, air, by arguing that it was not found in the sky. Why, oh why, did we put categories on our wedding registry?
This is a prime example of a silly fight that was about something else. Of course, we weren't fighting about the game and silly words. So what was it about then? For starters, we both hate to lose. We're prideful, we're competitive. Melissa has constantly been compared to her high-achieving siblings, and I constantly needed to be good at things to prove my self-worth. In our different ways, we both feel we lack value, and we project those insecurities onto each other. Plus, winning is way more fun. Just ask me after the game of categories. But since that fateful day, we've grown. We've progressed as a couple, and all our fights have been much more serious in subject matter ever since. Because Melissa and I would never fight about something silly again, right? Wrong. In fact, just last week, we had a serious disagreement about an incredibly weighty matter, which went down like this. Being on the road has really taken a toll on me. You know, I'm exhausted from traversing the country like this.
Traversing?
Yeah, traversing, you know, like traveling, jet-setting, exploring.
Have you been reading a thesaurus behind my back?
What's that supposed to mean?
I've just never heard you use that word before. That's all.
Is traverse the only word in that entire sentence that you managed to hear?
No, but it struck me as odd. I mean, you managed to get a college diploma without ever taking the SAT. Are you still trying to prove something with vocabulary words?
I should pause here and point out that Melissa was making a factually true statement. Due to a procedural issue, I managed to get accepted to the University of Washington, an academically rigorous school, without taking the SAT. Melissa's dad once told me, a while after I graduated, that I should go back and take the SAT just to see how you measure up. So I feel insecure whenever anyone brings it up.
Since Dustin is being so honest, I will share that my SAT score was the lowest of my siblings. It's too bad the SAT doesn't take into account how many school dances and food drives you plan. Those dance themes and invitations didn't make themselves. What I lack in academic prowess, I make up for in my creative aesthetics of art and design. Did you see me sneak in those SAT words there?
My SAT scores are one of my and Melissa's tripwires. You know, those issues and events that, if brought up, will immediately trigger all-out guerrilla warfare. Melissa and I have learned it's better for us to identify and even name our tripwires so we can do a better job avoiding them. This day, however, Melissa tripped my SAT wire, and I erupted like Mount St. Helens. I'll spare you all the gory details, but our fight turned out to be one for the books. Literally, this book. A real dandy. It had everything a person could hope for in a marital spat. Lots of actions, tons of defensiveness, a handful of haymaker insults. I even told her I thought she inherited the worst traits of both of her parents, which went over about as well as you might imagine. In hindsight, we should have sold tickets to the neighbors. For more than an hour, our kitchen was basically a Rocky sequel, minus the presence of a muscular man, of course. All of this because of a stupid vocabulary word. And Melissa wasn't even trying to start a fight. She just noticed something and commented, Looking back on the conversation, here's a breakdown translating our communication. Being on the road has really taken a toll on me. You know, I'm exhausted from traversing the country like this. Translation, I am tired. The road is hard. Please empathize.
Traversing? Translation, Dustin has never said that word before, and it caught my attention.
Yeah, traversing, you know, like traveling, jet-setting, exploring. Translation, does she not know what that word means?
Have you been reading a thesaurus behind my back? Translation, is he saying I'm stupid?
What's that supposed to mean? Translation, is she saying I'm stupid?
I've just never heard you use that word before. That's all. Translation, I've just never heard you use that word before. That's all.
Is traverse the only word in that entire sentence that you managed to hear? Translation, why don't you care about the way I'm feeling, and why do you think I'm stupid?
No, but it struck me as odd. I mean, you managed to get a college diploma without taking the SAT. Are you still trying to prove something with vocabulary words? Translation, you're projecting on me, and I don't want any of that, so let me unravel you.
This is what I mean when I say the fights are never about the fights themselves. Fights are the cracks in sidewalks caused by the roots from the tree in the yard. Activity time! You're gonna fight. It happens. It's not an if, it's a when and what about. With that in mind, here are some low-stakes topics that, in my experience, are fairly safe to fight about. Remember when you were a kid and you'd play poker with the chips, but they didn't represent money? It's like that. Topics such as, best episode of your favorite show. Is ketchup on eggs a sin against God? Worst band of the 90s. There are no wrong answers, but Limp Bizkit is the right answer. Dumbest thing we studied too much in high school. Most embarrassing footwear. Crocs or Heelys? Best Dorito flavor. Of the family uncles, which one is the worst? Happy fighting! Planes, trains, and angermobiles. Melissa and I have learned that location makes a difference. Our fights may be private or public, by ourselves or in the presence of friends, sitting on the couch or standing on aisle 5 of the grocery store. But our worst fights happen when one of us is driving. I don't know what it is about sitting in a car that makes our claws come out, but we have had our best and biggest fights there. Our 2013 Honda Odyssey basically becomes the Roman Colosseum on wheels, minus the presence of a muscular man, of course. What is it about automobiles that brings out the boxing gloves? I think it's because it takes a lot of energy to remain alert to other drivers while observing traffic signals so that you don't die before picking up your dry cleaning. Listen, I'm already grumpy if I have to get dressed and leave the house, so if you add a traffic jam to the equation, even asking me a question is a hazard to your physical and emotional health. It doesn't help that I get carsick, and because of that, I do 100% of the driving, when I'm not puking, and insist on controlling the music with the tyranny of a less than benevolent dictator. There's also the fact that while riding in a car, you're trapped. Cruising down the interstate at 65 miles per hour, you have nowhere to go. It's just you, your spouse, whom you currently wish wasn't your spouse, and 2 lava-hot coffees between you. Have I been tempted to throw my coffee at Melissa? No, absolutely not. I'm not a monster. But have I ever hoped Melissa would sip her coffee, burn her tongue, and lose the ability to talk for an hour? I mean, technically no, but it was very easy for me to imagine that scenario right now, so draw your own conclusions. It's a family tradition. I'm pretty sure I inherited my championship card boxing skills from my parents. They got divorced in 1990 when I was in kindergarten. That same year, my grandpa died and my dog Murphy left. No, Murphy didn't run away. He left. He legit packed up his belongings and trotted down the street to another family's house and decided to live there instead. Basically, 1990 was the 2020 of my childhood. I don't remember much about the years when my parents were married, but I do recall my dad's big blue Chevy conversion van. It had track lighting and a bed, a road trip dream. He nicknamed it the Enterprise since he loved Star Trek The Next Generation, and that was the only thing that made him feel like Jean-Luc Picard. In hindsight, the Enterprise was the perfect name for my dad's van because whenever we climbed inside of it, danger ensued and shields were raised. One time my parents, my sister, and I had been seated in the car for less than a minute when an argument ensued. The insults bounced back and forth like a ping pong ball. I have no idea what was actually said. I just know they were mad, and it was loud. As I look back on the story, as a current car fighter in my prime, I'm almost impressed. I mean, we hadn't even pulled out of the driveway yet. Another time, a particularly nasty fight broke out when my father was driving the family down the highway. Having had her fill, Mom screamed at Dad to stop the van and let her out. He complied, and she flung open the door with the strength of a Klingon and started to step out. That's when I unbuckled my seatbelt and declared, "I'm getting out too." Man, oh man, was I ever a mama's boy. As I collected my belongings, Mom looked at me and then looked at Dad. She climbed back in, and we drove off in silence. Speaking as a parent today, I know that nothing is quite as sobering as one of my children having to become the only adult in the room. I'd love to say that's never happened to us, but I couldn't say it hasn't happened to us this week. I don't judge my parents for these car fights. In fact, I've carried on their legacy. I'd like to say that once Melissa and I realized how I replicated my parents' unhealthy pattern, we worked with a licensed therapist to create a system to prevent car fights. But nope, we haven't done that. Melissa and I are the kind of couple who want to improve our marriage, but sometimes resist doing the work and making necessary changes. I'm sure you don't know any other couples like us. The hazards of mixing exercise with arguing. During the coronavirus pandemic, it became clear that we should absolutely never have a fight while performing physical exercise of any kind. Soon after COVID-19 broke out, Melissa and I took up running together. Yep, things had gotten so bad that we were forced to resort to cardiovascular exercise. It was a tough time for all of us, but it turned out to be the perfect hobby for me during this terrible time because it helped me keep everything in perspective. No matter how uncertain life felt and no matter how bleak the news was, I could trust that running would always be the absolute worst part of my day. But let me clarify. When I say that Melissa and I took up running, I mean that I took up running. Before the pandemic, I would go on the occasional, quote, run, which always started as a joke and then slowly devolved into a walk. On the other hand, Melissa has always been a prolific runner. And she's not the take a selfie at the local mimosas and mojitos 5K type of runner either. She's the kind of runner who doesn't until she sweats. When I met her, I had just quit all my sports after my sophomore year in high school and was gaining weight like I was getting ready to be butchered. She was a high school track and field star who would go on to be a collegiate runner. What were her personal records and placements in state? Please don't ask, because that's another tripwire. But during the pandemic, Melissa and I took up running together. One particularly hot San Diego afternoon, we had a disagreement about finances. We were planning a charity event and disagreed over how much money should be allocated for a donation. Melissa handles our finances, so she tends to be more fiscally conservative. Since I am relationally insecure, I tend to use material gifts to gain others' approval. Now here's the thing about being married to someone as long as I've been married to Melissa. Whenever you're losing an argument, you can always weaponize history. If I feel backed into a corner or out of options, I reach for the past and club her with it. That day, as we rounded a turn and approached to a fork in the road, both literally and metaphorically, I told Melissa she was being cheap, like always. You know, it's a banger of a fight when you drop in an always like that. And that's when Melissa did her best Robert Frost impression and took the road less traveled. She took the fork in the road, turning down a less busy street than our normal route. Melissa was smart enough to realize that no one is obligated to dialogue with a person who is insulting them. She stepped away to calm down. Because she did, I was able to catch my breath too. Melissa and I have learned that our marriage is best served when we are arguing about the right what in the right where. That means that going on a run when we're already angry is, ill-advised. It's just not wise for us to engage in a physical activity that increases our body temperature when our emotions are already hot. When we violate this rule, we've realized that taking a solo walk is a pretty good idea. That day, Melissa beat me home by 10 minutes. I entered the house and immediately apologized for calling her cheap. Now that our anger had time to cool, we were able to talk and better understand where each of us was coming from, and that helped us move on. Apologies and acceptance. No matter where a fight erupts or why, we believe it's critical that we end it in the right way. This usually means that someone, perhaps me, needs to apologize for something. Contrary to popular belief among husbands, conceding a point is not the same as saying I'm sorry. Sometimes I miscommunicate, crack a joke in poor taste, criticize Melissa's parenting decisions, or sit down for dinner and mutter, "Really? Chicken again?" The only solution to my comments is a heartfelt apology. I've heard other marriage guru types say you need to learn to fight well. I disagree. You need to learn how to end the fight well. There are a lot of poor ways to end fights, and I'm pretty sure we've used all of them. cheap shots and low blows, ultimatums, sarcasm, shutting down. I mean, these are all textbook Dustin and Melissa fight moves. But every once in a while, we like to break script and not end a fight poorly. We'll decide to take a minute to cool down, maybe remove ourselves from the situation to calm our chaotic emotions, and once in an especially blue moon, one of us might even try to understand where the other person is coming from. If you've ever seen one of us do this, it's essentially the same as spotting Bigfoot. That's because ending fights is hard. You can be feeling so many things: anger, hurt, sadness, competitiveness, contempt, pride. And no matter what you're feeling it at 100%. There's no subtlety in emotions or feelings during fights. Recently, a friend told me that she and her boyfriend have a safe word that, when used, immediately ends the fight. I told her that's not what most couples use safe words for. She responded that a therapist gave her the idea, and it's been very helpful. Their word is Pop-Tart, and if either of them uses it, the other person has to respect the partner in that moment and stop arguing. The fight ends right there, no matter what. This sounds like a great idea, but I'll tell you, it wouldn't work with Melissa and me. I have a bad memory and a bad temper. That means I'm going to forget the word, and she's going to get mad at me for saying papaya out of nowhere. Conceding can be a struggle for some people, and by some people, I mean me. Even though my first job as a teenager was at AMC theaters and my job title was literally concessionist, I'm still no good at it. Luckily, Melissa isn't either. She'll be the first to tell you that she is not an apologizer. It's just not her thing. Never has been. She's lovely and kind, and except for the one time that she had too many IPAs and declared to the entire Red Robin parking lot in Salem, Oregon that she's, quote, incredibly talented, she's humble. But she has a hard time apologizing.
All right. It was 2 IPAs on our anniversary/work trip. And yes, this character trait of mine is entirely true. I'm almost 40 years old and still struggle to apologize. My preference is just to sweep conflict under the rug and move on, completely avoiding the elephant in the room. Who says avoidance isn't healthy?
No matter which of us has caused the hurt, we find a way to set aside our pride, understand the other person's feelings, and eventually say we're sorry. Sometimes, however, the solution to a fight isn't an apology, it's acceptance. Melissa and I disagree about a lot of issues and ideas, and in many cases, no amount of arguing will fix that. This became clear during a clash Melissa and I had in our kitchen soon after our second child, Gloria, was born. The location was a better setting than our minivan. It was still a tight space, but at least it had multiple exits, and we weren't moving at breakneck speed. It was one of those spats where neither of us had any idea what we were fighting about anymore or how to make the other person feel better. Exasperated, I asked Melissa to just tell me what I could do to fix the problem. She took a deep breath, and I could see her genuinely trying to articulate how she thought and felt. After a minute, she calmly replied, "There is nothing you can do to make me feel better." At that point, I could either continue our pointless battle or accept that we had reached an impasse. Melissa's response brought us back to reality. Sometimes there isn't a solution. Life is hard, and we were feeling the pressures of it all. Once we accepted reality, the tension released. I've decided that if I want to be married to Melissa, then we should try to recognize why we're fighting, become aware of the bad habits we adopted from our own parents, and resist the temptation to vent our anger in the wrong place or at the wrong time. And when I forget these best practices, I need to swallow my pride and either apologize for my behavior or accept the differences in our perspectives. That being said, water is for sure in the ocean.
Hey folks, want to give a special shout out to our Essential as Oils patrons. That's our $25 a month and up tier. That list is Averill Griffiths, Jessica Sewell, Rachel Kennedy, Code to Grow, Dave Hoagland, Demarius Diaz-Stevens, Nicole Carraz, Tiffany Payne, Farrah Journey, David and Melissa Cox, Isaac Tarrin, Lori Amos, Carrie Teague, The Forgotten Friend Reptile Sanctuary, Jordan Cowan, Courtney Eibling, Juliana Smith, Bonnie Galliando, and Jennifer Ashley Downs. Thank you guys so much for what you give to the pod.